Okay, I'll let Ronan introduce us. He introduces usually now.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Ronan Nazarin Talks. I'm Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and today we have a very special guest, a friend to both our individual channels, and he certainly was an inspiration for me of starting my YouTube channel, and continues to be an inspiration, and that is Mr. Daisuke Beppu. Greetings to Tokyo this time. How are you doing?
Greetings from Tokyo. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and warm introduction. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, gentlemen.
And how are you, Nazrin?
I'm fine. I'm doing fine.
So in today's episode, we're going to hit on a couple of topics and just have a general discussion. The first one is kind of the boutique labels, and we'll go through them and maybe point out pros and cons for people who are perhaps thinking about starting a collection or how to grow their collection. And then we're maybe going to have a discussion about, seeing Daisuke's here, talking about Japanese master filmmakers and how they're perceived in Japan. And then we'll maybe open that up to a general discussion about how nations' film directors are kind of perceived within their own countries. Because obviously they might have a different perspective from our outward perspective looking in.
Okay, thank you. So, how do you want to start it then?
Well, we start with the boutique label discussion.
Yes, that's what I meant. Or how do you want to start the boutique?
Why don't we start with Criterion and let Daisuke talk about Criterion?
Okay.
Oh, okay. So, you mean good points and bad points about Criterion as a label, as a boutique label?
Yes.
Interesting. So, as some of you may know, so I'm a very big fan of the Criterion Collection, which is the mostly Region A North American label that's out of New York. And so it releases a number of noteworthy examples of cinema, classic cinema, meaning cinema that is not contemporary, and also examples of more recent contemporary works. And it has a very big following. It's been around for a long, long time, ever since the Laserdisc days. And of course, Criterion is derived from the Voyager company, which also has had a very big multimedia presence from the 1980s and into the 1990s. Plus, it has a Laserdisc history. Also, it has an early DVD history, and now it's continuing with Blu-ray and also its own streaming service. And of course, I think the biggest connection it has in terms of a sort of a relationship with film distributors and that kind of relationship is Janus Films. And so there is a lot to offer. There's a lot on offer from the Criterion Collection in terms of a kind of variety of certain types of cinema, and also a really good presentation of the films, generally speaking, plus kind of wealth of extra information, which we know as supplemental information, that's usually put together very, very well. And it's also quality and quantity. And also there are other aspects which I think have allowed Criterion to sort of gain a really strong following over the years. Cover art, certain issues regarding DVD, Blu-ray upgrades, out-of-print titles coming back to the collection, and all these sorts of things. So this is in general what the Criterion Collection has to offer. There's I think a strong catalog of films. I mean, it's not perfect. No label is perfect.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who looks at the Criterion Collection will probably identify a number of gaps or faults or oversights or places that Criterion is probably not as quote unquote strong as, say, other labels. And I also understand there's a commercial impulse behind Criterion and other labels. It has to make money, and so there's a kind of commercial impulse that is not completely. In other words, it's not a completely. It does require certain decisions that probably depend on the profit motive, which is completely understandable in today's age. But and it's not to say that all the great films in the world in history are all gathered together under one umbrella, that is the Criterion Collection. On the contrary, the Criterion Collection, if anything, is a very, 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 very small representation of the entirety of cinema. And I think even the Criterion Collection people, I'm just speculating, of course, but I think even the people at the Criterion Collection would definitely acknowledge that as well. There's only so much that Criterion can do with its finite set of resources, as is true with any other label, of course. But so there are some faults with it and some gaps, and I do acknowledge that. And also there are some other issues that arise with respect to physical media and the reach of physical media, the cost. Is it really worth it to buy a Blu-ray from Criterion at the cost that it's being offered at? Even if it's half price, it's still somewhat expensive. And so there are all these issues that I think are potential negatives, but there are a lot of positives as well.
Yeah. What I'd say one of the really good thing Criterion actually has is they seem to have the trust of a lot of different studios and independent distributors who sell their titles to Criterion or sell the rights to distribute them. Because the Criterion's brand name, I think they have access that a lot of other distributors just don't have. They just have trust. Because
with Criterion there is, because it has a Criterion name on it, so even if you're not familiar with the film, if it's in the Criterion collection, usually if you're doing blind buys, you end up with nice surprises, and they're generally of a certain standard of film, even though obviously film is subjective, but you kind of know what you're going to expect to get if it has that Criterion name on it. I think certainly from a Region B buyer initially, obviously I've now got a multi-region player, which is both a good thing and a bad thing for my wallet. But if you're from a Region B perspective, obviously they're starting to release more Region B Blu-rays. But certainly that was perhaps something that was lacking in the kind of earlier days. But obviously, as in a perfect world, everything would be multi-region, but unfortunately, due to rights, that's not possible.
Yeah, but we're getting there with the Region Bs, but it's still not great compared to what the American get. We get little bits and bobs as dribbles compared to America. It's getting better every year. I think more every year's coming out here as well as the American ones, but there's still titles they can't get. There's still titles you had to bring in. I've just bought Until the End of the World. You couldn't get that on Region B, and because of distribution rights all through Europe for different countries, so I had to buy it from Region A. That's just the way it goes. So there is that happens.
Yeah.
But it's kind of Criterion's kind of the king almost of this area, which is good and bad because they've got the quality, but they've also they're the ones that every other distributor's trying to be as good as, which is good and a bad thing because you might be viewed as a little staid compared to some other distributors because they're the kind of label that's at the top. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and they also have a fantastic closet.
Yes.
Which they often let filmmakers in.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And also, I know it's not necessarily the most directly relevant issue now, but Criterion was the one that essentially jump-started the kind of physical media package that we have now come to expect from a good Blu-ray or DVD label, in that the commentary tracks were more or less initiated by Criterion way back in the Laserdisc era, and they were. I mean, it's incredible to hear some of the early commentary tracks, which were called audio essays at the time, from the mid to late 1980s, and to hear them, and they're really consistent with the commentary tracks that we now know from for many good physical media releases. Also, there were a lot of supplemental materials that were packed into a good number of the early Laserdisc releases from the Criterion Collection. So this is all to say that the Criterion Collection did pioneer a lot of things that we know today. And in terms of physical media cataloging and the collecting aspect, which is now very widespread, as we all know, there was also the idea of including a spine number on the Laserdiscs as well, which is an interesting thing. And of course, now we know that spine numbers are pretty common, not for every label, but for a lot of the ones that we know and love. So these are just little things that have carried over into today's age. And so that's not to say that this is the reason why Criterion is considered the best by a lot of people, but they did spearhead a lot of innovations, which in a sense revolutionized this very how should I put it? This area of physical media consumption that we now know, and so there's a lot to Criterion's presence, not just in terms of their quality now, but also just how long they've been around and how long they've been doing this. So it's a very interesting track record that they have.
Yeah, and they haven't particularly rested on the laurels, because they continue to put out titles and make announcements. What is it, about 3 times a year, twice a year, 3 times a year? So obviously their Spine 1000 was a big deal, and they continue to produce good work.
Yeah, but I remember when I was a student, I couldn't afford Laserdisc, but you always heard what Criterion was doing. You always thinking, I wish I could afford that. It was that thing with the goal to get to as a film collector. And then when DVD came around, you started to be able to get access to that, and you could start buying in imports of like Region A titles from Criterion, because I was buying Criterion discs in like the 2000s, just the Buñuel films and stuff that was hard to get hold of, but you'd get hold of them and you'd import them in just to get access. So it was always that kind of beacon, if you're a film collector, to get Criterion stuff, because they had the film that no one else could find, and they'd do the restorations. I think the restorations, one of the big things about Criterion is so important, is their restorations were really important to make sure that quality was a big factor.
Yeah, can you remember, Daisuke, what your first Criterion was? I think you've probably been asked this before.
Oh yes, I've been asked this a number of times, and I'm afraid to admit that I can't remember my very, very first one. I remember, when I remember back in the day, I was around when they first started to release the discs, and I was a student at the time, so I couldn't afford to get all of them, and I wasn't at all thinking about collecting them, but I got a number of them at the time. So I remember getting, say, Hard Boiled or The Killer, or RoboCop as well. I think I got Sisters. I got as well, and I got a number of others along the way. Not everything, but I was also big into the Japanese cinema, so I got a lot of the Teshigahara films. I remember that was a big deal. Mishima, I remember when that came out on DVD for the first time. That was a real shock. I was so happy to see that. But those came later, of course. But the earlier ones, I managed to get a few of those when they first were released, and I still have them. So but I don't remember my very first one. No.
Yeah, I don't remember either. Even though I've got a feeling it was probably something to do with Kurosawa, and I think I made a point of getting as many Kurosawa Criterions as I possibly could. I think.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure my first Criterion was a Buñuel. I'm pretty sure it was, which probably suits my channel name. So I think that was the first one I got. I think I was the test one. It was like, it's probably just because it was cheap on some of the other titles. I thought I'll test out with this one, and then I'll bring in other ones after that, because there is quite a lot, because I mean, if you come from Britain, you have the import fees as well and all the rest of it. I'm sure in Japan's the same way. You've got those additional fees, so you had to kind of work it out beforehand. Really.
Yes, that's right. That's shipping costs can be quite significant, and so one has to be very, very careful in terms of you have to you know this as well as I do. You make the calculation: is it worth getting it more kind of in bulk versus getting just one? And you have to think about what are you going to do if you get something in the mail and it's not so damaged, but it's a little bit cracked or a little bit dented or something like that. Is it worth the return and all that stuff? Yeah. So all these considerations come into play. Sure, definitely.
Yeah, I've had a thing where anything coming from overseas is, if the disc works, I'm happy.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. The other stuff's nice, but if the disc works, that's what's important. Really, I can take little cracks. I can always switch the case over to another case somewhere, and no one will notice. But as long as the disc works, really.
Yeah, I would say maybe one of the trivial cons of Criterion, it's probably my eyesight, but sometimes the spine numbers are quite difficult to read. But again, that's probably just my eyesight.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you. Yeah, that's something that it's sometimes difficult for me. Maybe it's my advancing age kicking in. I'm not sure, but yes, I do find it a little bit difficult to make out the spine numbers. I don't know. What other labels out there that have spine numbers do it really well? Maybe Indicator has a really
Indicator
nice,
nice clear ones.
Yeah.
Masters of Cinema does really well too. It's very clear and
Yeah. Thing is, at my age now, I just have to get reading glasses out and just say, okay, reading glasses on. You have to do it, otherwise you can't see it. It's just there's no way around it. But so we've covered Criterion. Do you want to talk about Indicator then, Ronan? Since you love Indicator.
Yes, I do love Indicator. I think anybody who watches my videos might kind of get that hint.
Yes.
Indicator have only been going about for a couple of years. I think I only kind of was first aware of them through picking up Blue Collar and Charlie Varick. And I was so impressed by the packaging and the booklets and the work that they do in the extras. I kind of became hooked. And I think it is a label that I probably would try and get all the releases. I'm certainly getting there. Their box sets, again, the amount of work that they do, the restorations, and when you consider that I believe it is just a husband and wife team that actually run Indicator, I feel it's important to kind of support them. Also, I don't get paid, just before I say that, it just sounds like it. That quite a lot of my random reviews are actually on Indicator releases. But the thing that makes Indicator special, I think, even films that I haven't heard of, they turn out to be such pleasant surprises. Yes, you can say the con with Indicator is they don't do non-English language films. They pretty much just do American and British films. But there's so many just little gems like The New Centurions or Bellman and True that just kind of get forgotten about, and Indicator just do a really nice job and actually picking those ones up and releasing them, and the restoration on the Hammer box sets and the Harryhouse. And I'll stop now because it sounds as though I'm getting paid, but I'm not.
Yeah. I think the odd films that would fall through the cracks are biggest strength. The stuff like either you've never heard of them, look interesting, or they're films like Winter Kills, which I saw years ago and I've always been wanting to see again. Or the early John Huston films from the 70s, like Fat City, stuff like that. It's like they do those films, or The Last Detail, or The Passenger. There's like so many of those films that's like, well, thank God someone's released these properly, because I really want to see them. Or I want to rewatch them, because I have a rubbish copy of them, so I want to have a good copy. It's like, plus you get extras, you get all those interviews with people, which you get as a commentary track almost, of people talking from like BFI events and things, which really work. I mean, I think the downside though is there's so many films that no one's ever heard of that even we might not have heard of. and it's like, what is this? What's this film? And you have to take a leap of faith in some of those cases and hope you
Yeah, but
land.
to be honest, I'll admit, out of all the indicators that I have, there's maybe only like one that I probably won't watch anytime soon. You know, a couple of the ones in the Hammer sets are up to volume 5 now. Perhaps you wouldn't revisit for a while, but on the whole, there've been some little gems.
Yeah.
Incidentally, what's the one that you wouldn't revisit?
Probably Psych 59. Again, it's an okay film, but it's not one I would particularly revisit, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I have to be honest for balance. It's like one title now.
Yeah. The one thing I do now is I know everyone's going to buy them, so I'll just say, if this one looks a bit, I'm not sure, but I'll just wait to see what he's bought and see what he's got to say about them. If one I'm on the fence with, I just think, okay, I'll wait and see if his review of it and see if it's worth it or not. You know what I mean? Because
yeah, like No Orchids for Miss Blandish. I mean, that's just spectacular, and I had never heard of it. It's just an amazing little film.
And the Hammer box set yesterday's Tomorrow.
Yeah, Yesterday's Enemy.
It's the Enemy. That was so good.
That's a great film.
Yes.
You know, it was.
Yes, I agree.
So you get.
Do you have any thoughts on Indicator?
I think it's a great label. I think it's a label that is, as you indicated, Rowan, and I think it's something that has a lot of films that can go under the radar, but if they're given a proper release in the loving care that Powerhouse Indicator gives them, I think they're really worth checking out.
Yeah.
Their price point is, I would say, it's not so bad, right?
Yeah.
In terms of this kind of boutique label, they're not. I guess they're reasonably priced, I think. But yeah, I've been with Powerhouse Indicator since the beginning, and so and I heard about them, fairly early on, and I was attracted immediately by their inclusion of those early John Carpenter releases, and then it was smooth sailing from there. And every other release was either something, oh wow, I didn't expect this, or oh wow, I didn't expect this. Meaning that it was either a really pleasant surprise, or it was just something that was completely completely off my radar. But still, and they continue to do great work to this day. So, I'm a big supporter of Powerhouse Indicator. Yeah.
Yeah, the release of Night of the Demon was absolutely wonderful.
I know, it's so good. And the last movie, someone released the last movie. That was something else. That was like one of those films you just thought, I can't believe someone's actually released this. It was such a nice moment.
I'll stop talking about Indicator.
Oh, all right. Well, I do Arrow then, since I'm yeah, okay, right. Arrow came out of it started off pretty much as they kind of releasing the sleazier films to DVD. A lot of the other titles were like Beyond Reanimator and things like that. DVD, Soft Nazis Must Die, with a couple of extras. They were kind of the expansion of the exploitation distributors from the DVD era and the VHS era, and then they started to do more ambitious titles. They did Argento's films like Deep Red, Inferno, Birds of the Crystal Plumage, and then they started to do stuff like Night of the Hunter and Arrow Academy. And since then they've been keeping to the base, which is like 80s horror movies. We get a lot of horror movies which I've never heard of as gets released, like Blood Rage, stuff like that. Which you end up finding yourself owning a lot of really strange horror movies. They've also been doing things like The Human Condition in Arrow Academy. You've got the Buddhist trilogy, or the Buddhist films. And it's just like a total delight, because they keep expanding, trying new things, and everything's always a bit different. I mean, they did Dawn of the Dead early on, and now they've moved up to doing like George Romero films from like There's Always Vanilla, some of his early films that no one's heard of. So they keep expanding, trying new things all the time, but they always go back to their base, and use that as something that will pay for these really obscure films that are just beautiful, you know.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about Arrow Academy is they have kind of found a vein of these film noirs that were kind of forgotten about and lost, like Women on the Run, Too Late for Tears, that they've helped in the restoration, and again, films that personally I'd never heard of but are absolutely fantastic noirs. Obviously, they're 80s slasher films, you can kind of take them or leave them, but even the extras on them, sometimes the making of the film is actually more interesting than the film sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, they have the Hysteria Continues podcast doing a lot of commentaries for them, which I'm more interested in than the films, basically. Like always, you know. But yeah, but they've bought the Third Window as well. It's now releasing a lot of Japanese films, like Sion Sono films. They're just supporting lots and lots of terrific filmmakers. They're releasing other titles, is it Second Sign or something? The Volspot that's
Second Run.
Second Run, that's it.
Second Run.
Yeah, I went a blank there, and they've got an amazing number of films, and it's like they just keep on growing and building upon what they've made done before to try and do new things. And it's like, I think they're quite exciting because they came from basic exploitation and just have built and built and built and brought out films that are very hard to find. That there's so many like Japanese genre films that battles without humanity or honor, which is just amazing. I've been wanting to see them for years, and it was so nice to finally see them on Blu-ray. And it was like, my God, finally! It's like after years of looking for them and seeing them for like hundreds of pounds on eBay, and been like, I can't afford that. So again, this is a kind of almost fanboy. I'm not getting paid by them. So anyone's got anything to say about Arrow? Like
Daisuke, do you want to say anything about Arrow?
Oh, I agree with everything that you said. It's one of the it's one of the strongest labels out there, and it seems like it's just continuing to grow strong. And as you say, I think its strength is in its variety. It has such a wide variety, I think, which has been buoyed so well by, as you indicated, the Arrow Academy line. Yeah. And I'm a big fan of the Arrow. The Arrow video line, which is, as you indicated, the horror genre exploitation side, and the giallo side as well, and some of the more genre exploitation films, let's say from Japan, for example, I think are really good. Some of those releases are really better than a lot of the releases that we can find here in Japan of those same films under Japanese labels, and so it's really wonderful to have. And plus, the Arrow Academy line, that's the Arrow video line, and then the Arrow Academy line, as you indicated, is what is it, in air quotes, the art house line, but still, some of those titles are just amazing. I'm speaking of Japanese films, if I may, as an example, because it's just one example of many of the things that Arrow does really well, but Arrow is one of the few labels outside of Japan that is really focusing in on a kind of obscure kind of Japanese cinema, and even Arrow Academy. You mentioned the Akio Jisoji. It's called the Buddhist Trilogy set, I think. The Akio Jisoji films, which is really it's a set that it's kind of, those films are kind of. They're kind of hard to get in Japan. They're not impossible, but they're kind of hard to get in Japan here. But the release of those films on that set is just so much better in terms of supplements and that sort of thing than what I have here under Japanese Blu-ray, as an example. And also, they're releasing films that are under the so-called ATG, Japanese ATG Art Theater Guild line, including those films also. Kiju Yoshida box set, which is one of the... I was so impressed with that particular box set as well. Also, the Seijun Suzuki films, that the so-called Taisho trilogy and that sort of thing. And then they combine that with a lot of great just horror genre box sets that make collectors just so happy, and even the casual film fan just jump up and down in delight. And were they the first group to introduce the reversible sleeve, or
possibly? And they have artists.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they perfected it anyway. They're the ones that do it best. Really, I think
that's true. Yeah. I mean, their artwork is just absolutely enthralling, and I know a lot of people who are into physical media, take that very seriously. And so, it's a great label. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I always dread the sales because I know I'm going to do so much damage to myself. It's just it's just brutal.
So, Daisuke, do you want to maybe speak a little bit about Eureka, Masters of Cinema?
Oh, okay. So yes, so I am also very much a supporter and fan of Eureka, Masters of Cinema specifically. I know Eureka as a label is bigger than the Masters of Cinema lineup, but that's a pretty big component of it. And I have to be clear. I don't have a full DVD collection of Eureka Masters of Cinema, the DVD lineup, which, as you know, has its own spine number order.
Yes,
and it came a little bit earlier. Yeah, it came a little bit earlier than the Blu-rays. It is a little bit confusing, actually, but there are some really great gems in the Eureka Masters of Cinema DVD lineup, some of which have fallen out of print, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Slowly, the catalog, I think, is being reintroduced either by Masters of Cinema itself or maybe other labels, etc. But so I'm a fan of the Blu-ray, or the dual format Blu-ray titles, and I think they do a lot of things that I think complement a label like, say, Criterion. A lot of the films you might find a lot of overlap, which is very good. There's also a lot of stuff that they do that Criterion doesn't necessarily focus in on, which I think is one of Eureka's strengths. I would point, for example, to the silent cinema lineup that we find in the current Eureka Masters of Cinema Blu-ray or dual format lineup. It's really one of the strongest of the sort of boutique labels. And I think it rivals, or perhaps even some might say it eclipses Criterion's own silent cinema lineup as well. And it's really fantastic. I mean, that's just one example of how Masters of Cinema is really doing very well. There's a lot that has been said lately about is it okay, or should we really interpret their relative small number of releases compared, say, to Criterion or Arrow to be any sign of something? We've always heard that, but my feeling, or my sort of speculative hunch, is that it's still doing its very best and producing a lot of great releases. And so I'm a 100% supporter of Masters of Cinema. I enjoy very much what it is they do.
Yeah, I'm the same, and I'll echo your point, which is a great one. The silent films that they do, they are jaw-dropping, the restorations. It's hard to believe that some of them are like 100 years old or getting that way. I mean, Nosferatu and Der Golem, the restorations on them are just stunning. So for people who are perhaps put off by silent cinema, or go buy some Eureka Masters of Cinema silent releases, because they are just stunning, and you will quickly forget that their age, and they're amazing.
Yeah, because I'm a massive Murnau fan and Fritz Lang. I love German expressionism. So I was buying them during the DVDs, and then you've been rebuying them during the Blu-rays. It's just like constantly. I'm not Queen of Miguel, probably rebuy them again because they are doing really good work in them. I also think the number of releases they put out, it's always been kind of more of a dribble than anything. I think it's to do with the budgets. It's like, we can afford this amount of films per year, and that's what we do. I don't think it's anything else beyond what they can afford per year. And So they're the kind of distributors that I try and buy full price from them more than anything else, because you know they kind of need it more than anyone else, really. Like, those are the ones that really kind of need it, because they're putting out very difficult films to put out, like, you know, Faust, the Murnau's Faust is, that would be forgotten otherwise, pretty much. And they did Sunrise and just some really beautiful stuff. And they've been doing the documentary like Hitler's Hollywood, which was astonishing. So I mean, they've been doing some really good stuff.
Yeah, and as Daisuke says, they've kind of branched out into just the standard releases. So they released a special edition of Cujo. They've done like the Dark Half. So they do have a kind of other line. So they do kind of have two streams going at once.
You forgot Dogs of War.
Dogs of War.
Yes. Starring his favourite actor.
One of them.
I know, but it was, I was amazed he didn't mention Dogs of War. I was like, wow.
Yes, it slipped my mind.
Alright. Yeah, they've been they've got some really wonderful stuff. They re-released Flesh and Blood, Paul Verhoeven's Flesh and Blood, and the international cut with all these documentary stuff around there. I was like, this is amazing, because you had to buy this from Europe and a terrible DVD before, and it's like, you just get a pristine transfer of that film, and it's like, and that's a film even the director doesn't like. So it's not like he's been pushing to get it restored or anything. So it's things like that they really do.
Yeah, but as Daisuke says, you know, the DVDs, a lot of them have went out in print, but I've also found quite a lot of them you can get on secondary markets for relatively cheap, just because they're DVDs. So I've certainly added to my DVD collection of Eureka that way. But obviously some of them are out of print.
But a lot of them upgraded. They upgraded a lot of their titles to... Yeah. But I'm hoping that someone does Brings the Vampire over here in Blu-ray, because we've only got the DVD so far, unless you buy the Criterion.
Yeah, I would recommend the Criterion.
I know, it's just like, it's expensive.
Shameless plug, but the Criterion Vampire is fantastic.
I know, but it's expensive. You have to bring it or import it. It's like, you can only afford so much.
You get a book.
What?
You get a book with it.
I know, but there's only so much I can buy.
Yes.
I've enough trashy films to buy every month as well, you know.
Yes, you have your trash budget and your class budget, so...
Yeah. Right, what's over BFI as well? Do you want me to do BFI?
Yeah, on you go.
Because BFI is my kind of favourite one that no one talks about much, really, because BFI kind of gets mixed with Eureka and Criterion almost, in a case of, but it's kind of the little brother no one talks about, because it's tied to the British film industry as being the film distributor. And I think a lot of time people forget how many good films they release yearly that are really important films, like the Flipside series, where you get these obscure films that no one would think about. You get a lot of like silent films about like Everest and the trying to travel through Antarctica and things. They've all these old silent films that no one would touch. You know, they did the stuff about the concentration camp films. They've done all of those. We released a lot of films from different countries that are very hard to get hold of, and they've brought them in and they've restored them and put them out. So they do a lot of the ones that are very unprofitable almost. It's like the stuff they do. Derek Jarman films. They do films that are really hard sells, like harder sells than anywhere else, I think.
Yeah, they do experimental stuff like Kenneth Anger, and they do you know, silent stuff, and they do have a wide range, which again on blind buys you're actually pleasantly surprised if you've never heard of them before. Yeah, but they also did Paul Schrader's Comfort of Strangers with Christopher Walken. Yeah,
but more importantly, they did Bed Sitting Room, which is a wonderful film, and they did stuff like that that's really hard to get hold of. That's really difficult, and they actually bring in difficult films in a way that, and I don't think they really go into genre films much anywhere else to supplement it. They actually just go full on for the harder releases, which I think is a difficult path to walk.
Yeah.
Really, I think they are kind of very underrated because everyone thinks more of Eureka and Criterion more than them. And then you realise how many you've actually owned of BFI. Because I was looking at my BFI collection, like, I've had a ton of these. I've got so many of these that are. You forget how many good releases I've had. You just buy them for the titles, and then it dawns on you how many actually were released by BFI and how many difficult ones were released by BFI. Like they do like Terence Davies films and things, which are hard sells.
Ken Russell as well.
Yeah, they do the box sets of Ken Russell stuff there.
Yeah.
The BFI is a.
Okay.
You see something, Daisuke?
Oh, yes, I was just going to add that just two things. So first, you mentioned Comfort of Strangers. As you know, Criterion very recently made its announcement for its planned releases later in the year, included in which is, in fact, the Schrader film Comfort of Strangers. So it looks like Criterion is releasing a film that was already released by the BFI, as you know. But just note that the BFI includes the commentary and other supplements that don't seem to be included in the Criterion release. So that's something to keep in mind when one is thinking about BFI versus Criterion. That's just one example, of course. The other thing is, just as another example, their Ozu film releases. I don't know if you have any of these, but their Ozu film releases are stunning. They're stunning for a number of reasons, but if you know those releases, you'll know that they include earlier Ozu films in the sort of main release. So they'll have the main release, and then they'll have I don't want to call them secondary films because they're just equally as important. They just came earlier in Ozu's filmography, and they're not necessarily as, let's say, prominent as Ozu's later films. But that is something that you don't get even here in Japan. You know, in Japan you have to get all the films usually in separate DVD or Blu-ray releases, so it can be quite expensive. But those Ozu film releases from BFI, those films, and also the box sets as well that they released on DVD, are really some of the best around. And if you want to get a full library of Ozu films outside of Japan, most of your purchasing will be through the BFI. And I should also add, as another thing, you know, the BFI has the website and online store, right? Yeah. And one of the things I really love is it has a little section called rare and like hard to find or something like that. And so if you click on that part of the store, I always look at that, and I that's one of the places I look is to see if there's anything that's going to fall out of print that I should keep an eye out for, just in case I haven't something I wanted to purchase but I haven't gone around to it. I always look there to see if there are any titles that might be starting to fall out of print, so I just keep that in mind. So that's one place that I go just to keep myself just to get any indication of anything that might fall out of print. That's a really interesting place to go. Their store is also very easy to use, I think, their interface.
Yep.
I mean, to my shame, I've got Ozu films in my backlog.
Oh, yeah.
On BFI, yes.
Oh.
I'll admit it.
Yeah. I used to buy them in from Asia. I used to buy the really terrible copies of DVDs, the Mr. something or other. They were really
Bongo, no?
Mr. Bongo, yeah. I used to buy them in from Asia, and when you couldn't get Ozu over here at all, and they were absolutely awful quality, but you got to see some Ozu films. It was wonderful, even though the quality wasn't that good, just to see them. So they were really something. Anyway, sorry for that old detour. I just remembered that there, sorry. Is there any other studios we're forgetting about that's really important that...
88 Films, who are, I suppose, kind of similar to Arrow Video. They kind of do 3 lines. They have an Asian collection, which is really fantastic because it's old Run Shaw films that are restored. And some of them are really good fun. They have an Italian collection, which is Giallo, and the police ones as well, the crime films.
Yeah.
And they also have a slasher with a nice red label. So again, they're kind of similar to Arrow Video, and they have numbered spines that are nice and clear to read for old eyes like me.
Yes. You've also 101 films, which also do like 80s like pulp and just like films that aren't the greatest of qualities, but they restore them. Then you get gems like Into the Night, which they release, or Three Amigos and things. So they release stuff that maybe are not high priority for some people, but they are good titles that you might want to see, or some stranger, older films that you wouldn't.
Yeah, Into the Night might be my favourite John Landis film, bizarrely.
Yeah. There's... I get the steelbook of Three Amigos with little bullet holes in it. I was very impressed. So yeah,
101 films have a black label line, and they have a red kind of label line. Kind of lots of obscure films from like the 50s and 60s, like the Alligator People. It's a lot of fun. Not for everybody's taste, but
yeah.
I think Man v Film covers them a lot. He covers quite a lot of their titles more than else, and he gets into detail about a lot of them. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, is that the main ones done? I mean, really, I think those are the kind of main distributors. Is there any in Daisuke? Is there any like in Asia that we don't know about that are worth keeping an eye on?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I do follow a number, but I don't. For me, anyway, in Japan, maybe the ones that might come close would be the Studio Ghibli releases here in Japan, but those have pretty good releases outside of Japan as far as I understand it. So there are other releases here, other labels, but the films that I'm really interested in, but unfortunately they don't have any English language support, no subtitles or anything like that. So you do get these occasional really big lavish box set limited releases of certain films from Japanese film labels. I think the most celebrated one at the moment, the hot item at the moment, is the recent release of Akira here, which has a really nice box set feel. It's not a box set, but it's a box. And occasionally you'll see things like that. You'll see releases of on Japanese labels of films like I have Dark Star, the Japanese release of Dark Star, which is really nice. I don't have it, but I know a friend of mine is going to get the Japanese release of Day of the Dead, with all these little, collectible items and things like that. And so there are a number of releases like that. There are maybe I'm not sure if they're labels, but you can get a number of the films with English subtitles on Blu-ray. A lot of the Koreeda films you can get on Blu-ray through Amazon Japan or other outlets, I'm sure. There are some great releases of the Torasan films, in case you or your audience knows about those. I'm sure you do, and they're very famous here in Japan, and they also have English subtitles here. Right. But I also understand that they can really fetch a pretty penny when you include shipping, because shipping from Japan to outside of Japan, I understand, is very, very expensive. So, and unfortunately, Japanese Blu-rays tend to be very expensive from the get-go, so they're quite expensive for me, and so I can only imagine how much they would be for someone who wanted to have them shipped. I can't even begin to imagine that. So that's one of the downsides about the Japanese DVD and Blu-ray market in general, is that they're quite expensive, and it's hard to find really good quality Blu-rays at decent prices. Criterion and Arrow, sure, they're expensive, but you can always wait for a sale that is reliably going to come once or twice or maybe more times a year. But in Japan, it's not that easy to get half price deals on these releases. Even the older releases still hold fast to their really high suggested retail prices, and so that's a little bit of a prohibitive thing when it comes to purchasing Japanese Blu-rays, especially if you're outside of Japan. And I'm sure you and your audience will know a thing or two about that, I'm sure, in terms of trying to purchase Japanese Blu-rays from Japan directly.
Yeah, I mean, Touch of Film was giving people sites of these are the best place to get Asian films from the UK, basically, so you're not going to get killed with that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of them you buy from Asia, but not specifically Japan. I think it's from like Hong Kong, really, or something. I'm not sure, but they seem to be come in easier, really. But a lot of Japanese films and like Korean films are now coming to us via these companies we've just discussed. A lot of them are coming over here. You can read the box sets. You'll get all these different box sets of different directors, so you can start to find some of the films and start to really get into films of directors you've heard of for years but you couldn't see anything from. So that's quite good.
Despite the kind of narrative that physical media is dying, I mean, the last 2 or 3 years has been amazing for physical media releases, and upcoming releases for this year continues to be like that.
Yeah, I know by my pre-orders and how much they all cost,
Yes.
and how like the Jodorowsky one is like 50 odd quid over here. It's
Yes, but I can't wait for the Jodorowsky one.
I know things. I bought the last one from America, and it's pretty much the same films, but I still spent the money on this one too. It's like I've no resistance. It's a pretty box.
It is a pretty box.
You know,
You get a book.
I know it's such a pretty box, so I couldn't resist. How do we think it's going to go in the next couple of years for like streaming or buying Blu-rays? I've got my theory, which is basically that streaming will get bigger, but Blu-rays will be a kind of niche audience for people like us that'll be profitable for this niche, and it'll continue on its way the same way CD buying and vinyl buying is for music lovers. I think it's just going to be this little thing that's there.
Yeah, I mean, in high street shops, if you remember what the high street was like, shops now have kind of a collector's edition bit where they sell all these kind of boutique labels, and it'll probably just get to that. It will just be like a section, and more people for quote unquote mainstream films will probably just stream. But I think there'll still be a market for the collector's edition corner.
What do you think, Daisuke?
Well, I have to remain realistic and cautiously optimistic in that it wouldn't surprise me. Of course, I would like to see the market continue for as long as possible, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Blu-ray market suddenly collapsed under the weight and pressure of streaming services that just keep getting bigger and bigger. There's nothing wrong inherently with streaming services as long as it's just a different method of watching cinema. And I'm sure that those, when VHS and later DVD came into being, I'm sure those who were really into watching the cinema in the theater experience were decrying and were sort of looking down on the sort of home video experience that VHS and then later DVD and now Blu-ray has to offer. So I understand that it's not like for some people even the Blu-ray or DVD experience is not necessarily the ultimate way to experience a piece of cinema, but so hopefully the market will continue as long as possible, but I do understand the possibility that it could collapse a few years from now, 5 years from now, 6, I don't know exactly when, but it could collapse. But even if it does, the discs will still physically exist. They won't all suddenly disappear as soon as the market disappears. And so there'll still be a used market, just a collector's market, just like there is now for laser discs and vinyl. And depending on where you are in the world, that can be a very healthy one. I would say here in Japan, there's a kind of a sort of an interesting, almost paradoxical fascination, if you will, with physical media and physical things and how to enjoy music and movies in that sort of way. So there is a lot of streaming services here, but my point is that the used market will certainly take over like we see it now, and it'll just be a matter of trying to find the exact release version that you're looking for. I mean, but as you said also earlier, Solitary Ronin, I'm also encouraged by the fact that there are a lot of great releases that are still ongoing right now.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly the numbers as to how many people are buying them, but there are these releases that do cost, I can assume, a lot of money in terms of costs and manufacturing costs. And so either these labels are making money or they're losing money. And if they're making money, then that's good. And all indications are that, there are labels, of course, that we see folding.
Twilight
we
Time.
mentioned, which of course there are specific circumstances to that, and I completely understand that. But we always have to keep an eye out for that. Of course, we have to keep an eye out for Blu-ray manufacturers, player manufacturers. And also Blu-ray, TVs with Blu-ray players in them, TV manufacturers and Blu-ray player manufacturers. Those are the key components. Once they stop producing, then it's over for Blu-ray. But they're apparently still making manufacturing machines, and so as long as they're out there, then the discs will still be out there.
Yeah, I think in this case it'll be a kind of niche thing where I think they'll make them to who's buying them, really. I think maybe the big companies might not make them anymore, but I think smaller companies might find a profit in, because I mean people now make vinyls again, vinyl record players again. People now do that and they make money off it. It's not like a massive amount of money, but I think something will come up that'll serve that market. It might not be the most high tech thing, but it'll be something, even if it's not Sony.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the way it will be, this is my own guess, but the way it will be, of course, there's a difference between listening to music on vinyl versus cassette tape, or even now with audio streaming. It's not the most perfect analogy, I get it, because there is still a thing about watching a film versus watching it on DVD or Blu-ray versus watching it on streaming. So there are quality issues, but streaming is improving in its quality constantly, and it's constantly improving. So it will reach a point, technically speaking, where it will either equal or even eclipse the best Blu-rays that we have here, and that's just the technological trend right now, right? But where the niche market will come in, I think will be in terms of the versions, because as you know right now, even the best Blu-ray releases right now do suffer occasionally from the fact that we aren't necessarily getting the versions that we grew up with as a kid. Right. The most recent, I think, the most obvious example for many people is probably the Star Wars films, and so you have to really hunt for the right version. The Laserdisc, or the DVD that had the non-specialized versions for a little bit there, and all that stuff. But you can't get those under streaming, and so where the niche thing will come in, which is similar to vinyl, will be trying to hunt down for that really special version of the film that you want to watch. Because even for Blu-rays now, the most recent Blu-rays, the studios won't tell you where the changes have been made, but they're making changes, and they're making changes in a way that are making the original release versions unavailable. When I was talking about the James Bond films the other day, and you know how the James Bond films have those Blu-ray sets, beautiful releases, and they're lavish, and they have all these fold-outs and everything like that. But I was talking about the film On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and the Blu-ray that I have only has the audio soundtrack that's the 5.1 surround stereo, and it's different. It's not completely, but it's noticeably different from the earlier 2.0 track, which I'm used to. And so it feels almost like a different film. And so I always feel like if that's the version, the newer version, if that's the version that's going to become the standard, the norm, then and if that's the only version that will be available, say, on streaming, I'm assuming, but therefore we're going to have to hunt for the earlier DVD releases in this niche market in order to find the version that we want. The same thing is true for the Star Wars films. If we want to get those non-specialized or non-special editions, we have to hunt for the earlier Laserdiscs or VHS tapes or the earlier limited release DVDs, etc. And so it's the same. So the streaming will be very popular. Disney channels or Disney streaming is very, very popular. You can watch all the Star Wars films there right now, but are they the versions that you want? That's the key in terms of the growth of this niche market, as you suggest, I think.
Yeah, I think that I do some streaming, but I don't do it all the time. I still prefer discs, but there's certain films you can't get in discs. You have to buy streaming, and there's other films I don't want to pay a fortune for.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
they're not good enough, so I'll buy them for like £3 on streaming. You know, or you can get a rare film, or you can find a film you want to see that suddenly it's available for a few pound sale, and it's like, I'll get that now. I'll get the Blu-ray later on, but this will let me see it at least. Because there was a film So Long, My Son, which just came out, for £3 here. I'd rather have the Blu-ray to see it, but it's like, I want to see the film, so I'm just going to buy it here, and I'll get it later on.
Yeah.
The proper Blu-ray version, but this gets me to see it.
Yeah, this is such an important point too. This is not to say that, disagree with streaming. On the contrary, streaming is very, very important. It provides a reasonable sort of reasonable price to watch all these films. And as you say, there are examples where you can get a film on streaming for a really cheap price but if you wanted to find it, say, on DVD or Blu-ray, you'd have to pay. I can think of an example in Japan where there's a really great film. It's kind of obscure. You can watch it on Japanese streaming for what the equivalent is about maybe, I don't know, less than £5 or something, or $5.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get the same film on what is now an out-of-print DVD, the cheapest I've been able to find that DVD is something close to, say, $300.
Yeah.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ludicrous. So, of course, streaming has its advantages, and good for people who are using streaming for that, because, Blu-rays and DVDs, they can be really expensive. And so if you want to watch all these films at a fraction of the cost to you as the consumer, more streaming the better, I think. But again, we have to keep in mind there are also risks to that in terms of, are these the versions that we are enjoying on streaming that are really authentic to the artistic intentions, etc.? Are these the versions that we grew up with as a kid? Are they different? Are they changed?
So I thought we've got Daisuke here. I thought I would have a discussion about national identity of art. I think Yojimbo was the first Japanese film that I saw by Kurosawa, and I instantly fell in love not only with Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune, but Japanese cinema in general. And granted, I've only seen probably about 10% of it, but it's just kind of to get an idea of how those classic Japanese masters, Kurosawa, Ozu, Mizoguchi, Kobayashi, are perceived now in Japan. I know when the 60s came along, people like Oshima perhaps kind of didn't like them as much just because they were the old guard, but I think over time Oshima came to respect them again. And obviously we've got the new breed of Sono and Takashi Miike and plenty of others. It's just how those masters are perceived in Japan, and then we'll maybe open it up to how other countries perceive their masters, and how, if any of them are kind of transcendent the way Hitchcock is. You don't have to be in films, but if you say the word Hitchcock, people know exactly what you're talking about. Sorry for that vague question, Daisuke.
Oh, not at all. It's a very interesting one. So I should preface my comments by saying that I wouldn't call myself a representative of all the Japanese cinephiles, I suppose. But just based off of my own experience, I would say that while there is, of course, there is a respect for how you describe as being the sort of masters of Japanese cinema that are known internationally. And there is a kind of a knowledge of these filmmakers, but at the same time, are these filmmakers necessarily known by every single person in Japan? Probably not. I mean, so it's I would say something that's very similar maybe to other countries, other jurisdictions, and their own respective cinemas.
Yeah.
There will be those who are cinema fans who in those particular places that will know the cinema of that particular place very, very well, and then there will be the casual film goer who might not necessarily know all of the so-called quote-unquote masters of that particular area. And I think the same is true for Japan, that's for sure. Now, of course, there are people who know this stuff very, very well, and even with the so-called masters, there are some things that there are some advantages, a lot of advantages about living in Japan, and just having these certain resources available to one that aren't necessarily available overseas, and so there are, so there is a strong respect, a very deep respect for the masters, that's for sure, and it still goes strong today amongst the fans of cinema here in Japan, and whether that crosses over into the mainstream audiences, that's a question that I think can be answered by analogy in the country that you find yourself in, or any of your audience members finds him or herself in. Yeah.
So for example, personally, I think Michael Powell is the greatest British director of all time. Mm-hmm. But again, outside of film fans, I'm sure not many people know who Michael Powell is, or The Archers, mm-hmm. or Powell and Pressburger. Again, Hitchcock is the one that is probably transcendent, and you don't even have to be a film fan, you know who Hitchcock is. To a certain extent, maybe David Lean, but I'm not so sure. And again, it's whether, probably not as with national sports teams, I don't think national treasures of cinephiles would call them. I don't think they perhaps translate as well as far as a national consciousness.
Mm. Yeah, there's other directors like in Britain. There's like Alexander McKendrick, who had a short career, but he made like 3 or 4 masterpieces, like Lady Killers, Sweet Smell of Success, Man in the White Suit. He's not well known, but you might know a few of his films, like Whiskey Galore, but he's not really well known by most people unless you're a real cinephile.
Yeah,
and I don't think even some of the cinephiles know some of these people now. They just know the later people, and I think Britain, they're a bit focused in America, really, to the detriment of their own country. I think some of it's to do with the subject matter, but some of it's got to do with the press. I think in Britain, they don't like talking about British films very much. They really would rather talk about everyone else but Britain. Is it the same in Japan?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess it really depends. I mean, for example, I can think Koreeda films are spoken of quite frequently in the mainstream Japanese press and television. But I think the films that are spoken of, I think the most in terms of artistry, international appeal, and mainstream success, especially in Japan, are the Ghibli films.
Right.
Those are the films I think everyone in Japan knows. Everyone knows Ghibli films. So that's a very important thing, and that's very strong. Another filmmaker who's known, but maybe for some slightly different reasons, is Beat Takeshi.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Takeshi Kitano is his name, but he's known as Beat Takeshi here because he is a very famous television personality, and he still is to this day. He has TV. I mean, he has shows now on mainstream television weekly. And so you see him, and everyone knows him. My wife, she's not a film. She's not really into cinema as much as I am, but she knows Beat Takeshi. My kids, they're not into cinema as much as I am, or they don't know his films as much as I do, or they haven't seen them as much as I have. Let me put it that way. But they know Beat Takeshi, or my daughter knows Beat Takeshi very well because of his television appearances, which are very, very different, more or less, than his cinema endeavors, although there are a couple of exceptions to that, as I know you know. But so those are, I think, some examples of Japanese cinema that is actually kind of embraced either directly or indirectly, even in the mainstream Japanese media and television, even today.
Yeah, because we always heard that Beat Takeshi was actually more popular as a TV comic and celebrity than his actual films, because we all love his films, obviously,
Yeah.
from an international perspective.
Yeah.
But he is actually more famous being on TV.
Yeah.
What Mickey?
And his kind of crossover appeal. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll ask the second away.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so just to add to that, so it's interesting because his crossover appeal, as far as I understand it, in outside of Japan, is that I think his non-comedy films translate much better outside of Japan.
Yeah, perhaps.
Whereas here in Japan, his television persona is very much like his comedy films. Let me put it that way.
Getting Any.
So yeah, exactly. I don't know how well Getting Any. I mean, I know a number of people who like Getting Any outside of Japan, but I don't know how popular that film is outside of Japan compared to, say, his more famous films like Hanabi or Sonatine or Sonatine, as the Japanese title is. But so I'm sorry. That's all I wanted to add there. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I was just asking: is Mickey well known at all in Japan, or is he just?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's
That's a very good question.
85,000 films.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It really depends on the film that he's marketing at the time.
Yes.
As you know, some of his films are very, very like exploitation genre films that can't be shown to children.
Yes.
And yet there are other films that are very marketable because they have Japanese film stars and everything like that. So whenever he's making a film that is on the more marketable side, yes, his films will be marketed very much. And it's not all the time, but I remember one instance, I forget the film exactly, but it was a pretty quote-unquote mainstream film. And it was rather recent, and it was so recent that all the stars appeared on a kind of popular television show here in Japan to promote the film, but also to play, like, it's a kind of variety show games on the show. And it was on primetime TV. And I remember my family were sitting around the TV watching it, and it was Mike himself was one of the guests, and he was playing along with these with the games and all this stuff. So I don't know how well he is known as a film artist, but he is present here and there. And his films, especially the more mainstream ones, do get a lot of play and a lot of mainstream coverage, at least to a certain extent, because they have to be promoted, because they're being funded by by commercial interests, and so they are who are the sponsors for the TV programs most of the time. So, yeah.
I don't know how he does it.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, because over here everyone thinks audition or Japanese the Katawutsis, that thing where either it's crazy or it's very dark.
Yeah, but he was doing all these J-video, straight-to-video films long before he actually broke through. I think he'd done, 80-odd films or something before he'd actually gone through.
I know, but his breakthrough film in Japan, I don't think we really get over here, though. I mean, a lot of the more mainstream ones, they bypass us. Really, we're waiting for the next First Love.
Because
really.
Obviously Arrow and people like that kind of maybe focus on the more, what's the word, colourful of his films, shall we say.
Adult.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, because so we view him in a certain way, and it's like, and the more mainstream ones are like, those of his odd films, we don't quite get this. Like, with Terror.
So I mean,
no, it's okay. I was
just going to say, so there's obviously other British directors like Mike Hodges, Mike Lee, Ken Loach, Alan Clark, that in Britain are pretty much almost anonymous.
Yeah.
Obviously Mike Lee might be kind of more well known every now and again. He gets a successful film, but they've had long careers, wonderful careers, and they've kind of been forgotten about in Britain.
Apart from Cineasts, really. But in Britain, a lot of the actual press do not like talking about British homemade talent. Unless it's the first film or something, they don't really get the same support as even international filmmakers. They'd much rather talk about an international film than would about a British film. They just think it's the same old, really.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems we've got, is like the actual film critics don't like talking about British films. They're like a lot bit scared of talking about them in a weird way. Like they won't go into any detail about them, I find.
Yeah, and perhaps in Britain art isn't really that important because obviously we are kind of focused on films, but then how many great artists of the 20th century get talked about, or poets, or anything? I think Britain is more interested in sport, to be honest, than art.
Yeah, we like to be thought of as cultured because of the past, really. But most people aren't that interested. It's just not the thing. But it is kind of strange because but we do seem to be very much almost like the gatekeepers of everything comes to Britain, and we kind of put in libraries.
Yes.
But no one goes, apart from people who like that kind of stuff, really.
Yeah.
That makes sense, you know.
Yeah, is there a national identity and a national pride for cinema specifically? I mean, obviously in America they would say Hollywood's the best and they make the best films, and America has a certain pride about pretty much everything. But obviously I don't think Britain has that. Britain doesn't much. Well, some areas of Britain have a lot of pride, but most areas don't.
Yeah. How is Japan for that? Do they have pride in their artists, or the general people for pride in that, or is it just just another industry?
I think I think I can answer that in two ways. First of all, I think when it comes to something like, say, the Academy Awards in the United States, if there is a Japanese film that is nominated, or a few years ago, or maybe several years ago, there was a Japanese film that I think won the foreign film. It was at the time called the best foreign film category. Now that the name has changed, I think. But I think, yes, there is maybe not necessarily national pride per se, but there is a sense of pride in the film itself. And I think also, I mean, I can't speak directly because I don't live in South Korea, but I think something similar happened with the film Parasite, and Bong Joon-ho, his critical success with that film, quite deservingly so, I think. But quite certainly, so something like the Academy Awards gets a lot of press, at least here in Japan, that's for sure. And so that feels almost like a kind of it feels almost like a kind of World Cup, if you will. And if a film from where you're from gets nominated, there is a sense of wanting to support the home team, so to speak. And so I think that's very natural when it comes to the Academy Awards, because there is that aura with the Academy Awards there. So that's one thing. Whether that's really legitimate or whether it's appropriate for cinema, that's a completely different question. Do you like the Academy Awards or don't you? That's a different question. But as far as its mainstream appeal and how it's marketed here in Japan, that's certainly one thing that occurs. The other thing, though, which is an interesting thing, here's an example: the filmmaker, the Japanese filmmaker who's gained a lot of attention critically, especially I think in Europe. Let's say at festival circuit, would be a filmmaker like Naomi Kawase. I don't know if you know her, but Kawase's works, she's very active, and she is, I think, very well known in the festival circuit in Europe, in particular Cannes Film Festival, for example. But I would actually wonder whether she is really that well known here in Japan, as well as she is overseas. I mean, probably not every film goer will probably recognize her name and her works, but she does have the occasional film, for instance, in the Masters of Cinema lineup, and also she has had a festival success, and yet she's rarely talked about here in Japan, at least in the mainstream media, as much as, say, other filmmakers that I mentioned. There could be other issues related to that might be some factors with respect to that certain situation. But that's another thing too. This is a sort of filmmaker that has seen a lot of success on the festival circuit abroad, but not really a lot of attention given to that. But at the same time, there are other filmmakers that have seen also similar festival success and have gotten a lot of attention, positive attention here. I'll bring it back to Beat Takeshi. When he first got his festival circuit success, I think it was with Hanabi. Maybe what is it now? What is it? Is that now 20 years ago? I want to say. Is it that
just
long
about,
ago now? Maybe
over 20 years, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. So, man, I remember that feels like that was released yesterday for me. So that probably shows how old I am. But that film, I remember when it was when it received all the festival success that it did. That created a big positive deal
Yeah.
in Japan, and it created a lot of positive press for Takeshi as a filmmaker, because he was already a very popular personality, but then he became a recognized international cinema star, really. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess that's my long-winded way of saying it really depends. It depends on who you're talking about, and depends on what the films are, and what. So it's not necessarily a blanket statement on national pride infused
Yeah.
in cinema as much as it is who the filmmaker it is we're talking about, and what is the film that he or she is being lauded for.
Yeah, I mean, it is a kind of question of abstracts, really. It was just more um, my selfish love of Kurosawa and how he's kind of seen.
Yeah, yeah. But I think in some ways it's the same here, because there's certain films that get nominated that no one cares about. It's like, I'm not going to watch that, or that looks rubbish. But then there's certain people who are nominated, you hope they win, they're the British. I mean, I think when Gary Oldman went up for The Darkest Hour, most people genuinely want him to win because he'd done so much good work over the years. It was like, even if they don't like the film, he's earned it, they want him to win. But some other times it's like, I don't really fancy that film, I don't care, really. I think just, again, here it depends. But there is a kind of cynicism over here which is hard to get around, I find. Really, even though in some part of culture's really into the culture, other parts really aren't. It's like pretty much even a small bubble in it, or you're not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And also I would say too, I haven't been to the United Kingdom in such a long time, but I did live there for a few years when I was a kid. And what I do remember is this: there was a face of British cinema as shown in internationally, and there's this idea of like domestic cinema versus the British cinema that's shown also internationally, and also there's a really clear divide. In other words, I remember there were films that you would never see marketed outside of Britain, but it was really there were films that were tailor made for the domestic market. And so those films, I mean, so my point is that my understanding is that there is national pride in terms of international recognized cinema, but there's also a pride for sort of homegrown cinema that's just for the home market, and that isn't necessarily marketed outside. And I think at least when I was living there, whatever it was. In the 80s and 90s, it was certainly a very healthy culture like that. I mean, there were films that would never be shown in the United States, not because they were bad or they were poor in content, but just because they weren't made for U.S. audiences. They were made for British audiences. Yeah. And so I think there's also different ways to show a kind of national pride, not necessarily just in films that are recognized abroad, although that's a big part of it, as you indicated. But there's also a national pride in, potentially speaking anyway, in those films that are homegrown, stay homegrown, and that are made for audiences here or wherever we are.
Yeah, it's the difference between the full Monty and Blast Off, and then the kind of realism films of Ken Loach.
Yeah, but sometimes they break through. I mean, Parasite, I don't think was meant to be a big international film. I remember The Crying Game, the Neil Jordan film. It was meant to be released in Britain. That was it. It was not meant for international audiences. It bombed in Britain, really, and then it somehow got released in America, even though that wasn't the plan, and that's where it took off. So it was kind of weird because the place it was meant to be aimed for didn't matter, but America really loved it, and it was like, that's just the way it goes sometimes. So sometimes it doesn't quite work out the way even the film's created for. It's like I'm sure there's some films that come some films that come over here and released over here on Arrow or something might not be as big where they were made, but we like them better than the intended audience for some reason.
That's why cinema is so surprising.
Yeah. It's it's strange because I mean I do think sometimes if you look at another culture, you try to work at the culture and try to see different things in the culture, and it comes through in the films. Like if you watch a British film, a Scottish film is very different from an English film. Really, there's something different in the way that people see the world. If you look at any film from Asia, like a Chinese film, a Hong Kong film, a Korean film, and a Japanese film, all feel different. You know, even if they're doing a police thing, there is a different feel to them. Really,
Yeah.
you can tell roughly which country they came from just from the tone of them. There just is something there that's unique. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I remember, what was it, in the 90s or something? I was in the States at the time, and I remember the film, what was that film called? Twin Town? Was there
Yeah,
Twin Town?
The Welsh one.
Yeah, and it was marketed in the States, and I remember it wasn't. I remember seeing, maybe it was a Siskel and Ebert review or something, I forget, but it was given terrible reviews. But I was thinking, oh gosh, but this is probably the type of film that is. I mean, maybe it's not necessarily marketed for, or it was necessarily made for audiences in the United States, and so. I guess it really depends. I remember that so well. I saw that in the theater, I think, when it was released.
Yeah, I think
Whatever
that
it
was
was.
after. I think that was after Trainspotting, so they were kind of
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah,
get all
yeah.
these films out that were similar.
Yeah, but they thought Scottish, Welsh, no difference. Yeah, but and actually, it's a completely different culture, really. It's that was the thing. It was you do feel like even watching different films in different countries, you do feel something slightly different, even though you can't put your finger on it. But it's just something you feel when you're watching it. There's something there that's different from culture to culture, even within a culture that's seems similar to another culture to the outside world. There's still something you see just within the way that people react that reflects their culture and their beliefs that even you can't articulate it, you do feel it. Which is why I like watching films from different countries, because you find stuff out all the time, but things that you would never think about normally.
Yeah, that's why cinema's always surprising, and you always learn something.
Yes.
For sure.
And the next film you watch could be one of your favourite films, so that's why you keep watching different films.
Or it could be one of the worst films you've ever seen in your life as well.
Possibly.
Yes.
That's why we come full circle to boutique labels like Criterion. It's like, even if you haven't heard of the film or who's in it or whatever, and you blind buy it, it's full of surprises.
Yep. Yes. So is that as then basically, I think this is we've covered the main points. Yes.
Yes.
Is everyone happy with that, or?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. I'll let
Sorry for
Ronan.
the question.
I'll let Ronan finish it off.
Well, it was just if Daisuke, as you know, if you've been watching this joint podcast, we've been doing a series of videos on Bergman. I think we've only done 2 or 3, but it's just whether Daisuke had any suggestions of early Bergman, so late 40s, early 50s, and we could study those for our next podcast.
So remind me again what you've discussed so far.
The Faith trilogy,
Wild Strawberries.
Wild Strawberries, and Smiles of a Summer Night.
Which of those did you really engage with the most?
I think we're into all of those ones. Actually, we really liked them all. There was one. I mean, the Smells of Summer Night was more fun than the Faith trilogy, but I think we're both engaged by most of these films.
Yes,
Really.
I think I said in the video, The Silence is probably the one out of the 5 that I kind of find it hard to engage with the most.
But I was very engaged with that one. So
Yes, there you go. But I think my favourite one's Wild Strawberries so far.
yeah, and mine is probably Winter Light. So we're very different. So I wouldn't go in that direction. Try to cover that because we are.
Interesting.
No, it's just his early films are perhaps overlooked for his kind of his big hits, shall we say? But
we're trying to.
Certainly on these
sure.
wonderful
Well-
Blu-ray releases in the set, they're looking forward to revisiting them.
Sure. Well, I think in particular also the early '50s work is given a lot of high critical regard. But that's not to say that his '40s work is terrible. I mean, I think in particular the Bergman box set from a few years back from Criterion really shone a really positive light even on those earlier works that are often considered to be quote unquote lesser Bergman.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, even so, I would recommend. How many do you want?
Just two, I think.
Yeah, two.
Two. Okay. If I had to choose just two, then I would say, well, Smiles of a Summer Night is one of the big Bergman films. It's probably it's considered his first big international hit. So that's a big one. So Smiles of a Summer Night, I would suggest. But my favorites that I think are really, and I mean, Smiles of a Summer Night is great, but I would suggest actually maybe something like Sawdust and Tinsel.
Okay.
Which you can find. I think you can find. There's Criterion's release of that, I think. But there's Sawdust and Tinsel, and yeah, how about that? Sawdust and Tinsel. Well, actually, no. They're from the same year. I was going to say Sawdust and Tinsel and Summer with Monica.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
Okay.
I think I have Summer with Monica on a separate Criterion Blu-ray and in the box set.
Okay.
Of course you do.
Well, if you have the box set, you'll have both of those. So
Yeah,
that's no problem.
we both have the box set, so we're
Okay.
in good. So
This
it's like,
gives us a good excuse to actually plough through it.
we're doing okay. I mean,
Yeah, we're doing okay.
yeah.
Can I also just bring up The Emperor's Naked Army? Because I know
Oh, yeah.
you had recommended it. I bought the DVD of it and then never got around to watching it. But then when Second Run released it on Blu-ray, I watched it, Nazarins watched it, and were both absolutely blown away with it. I
Yeah.
was just going to ask you, when was the first time you saw it and what was your first reaction to it?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I'm so pleased to hear your response to the film. It is such an overwhelming experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it's jaw-dropping.
So I mean, even I mean, I'm not going to say too much about it because I want people to watch it as unspoiled as possible. But as you know, it really plays with one's allegiances. We think we're watching something, we think we know what's going on, but it just suddenly betrays our expectations in a spectacular way that is almost transcendental, and it's amazing the way that the craft is used and the subject matter and what a subject matter it is. It's so fascinating and so complicated.
Yeah, 'cause you
1
go,
minute you're
why am I watching this?
yeah.
Should I be watching this?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're rooting for the people, but at the same time you're horrified that you're rooting for these sorts, and all these mixed emotions comes. But anyway, yes. So when I first saw it, I was maybe it was many years ago. I first was made aware of Kazuo Hara's work when I was maybe in college, maybe a little bit more older. And not all he doesn't have a large filmography, but he had films that were made available, and DVD was around, and a lot of his films were released early on DVD in the States when I was there, Facets Video, and so you could watch his films, and they were released, and they were really good because you couldn't find these sorts of films anywhere else. The English titles being like Dedicated Life and Goodbye CP and then Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. And so and when you watch a film like that, you realize this is this is a Japanese film on the one hand, and it is such also a kind of anti-Japanese film on the other hand. Anti-Japanese meaning antithetical to what our general understanding or conception of Japanese cinema is. And I think on that score alone, it's an essential watch. Anyone who's interested in Japanese cinema needs to watch this film.
I mean, it's a film that kind of sums up what cinema should be. I mean, it challenges you It shows you stuff. It gives you information that you're perhaps not familiar with, but it's just mind blowing. The only kind of similar reaction I've had is the act of killing, and that kind of same way of, should I be watching this? What am I watching? This feels morally questionable, but it's an amazing piece of work, and I'm glad you recommended it, and we finally got around to watching it.
Oh, thank you very much. And if I could, I would just hold on for 1 second. If I could, I would actually recommend, if you can, it's in English. This is the English book of it, and I just happen to have it on my shelf here. This is called Camera Obtrusa, the action documentaries of Hara Kazuo, because in Japanese, the name is the family name is given first, so Hara Kazuo. So it's called Camera Obtrusa, and this is essentially a kind of well, this is in Hara's words translated into English. He's discussing in detail his notes about each of the films, and in great detail he goes into The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On, and so this is probably the best kind of supplement that you can find in English with respect to that film, if you are interested. If you like that film, this is essential reading. So I suggest getting Camera Obtrusa. You can get a soft cover version of it, paperback version of it, I think fairly cheap. It's still in print. So if you want to find more information about Hara and what he was thinking as a filmmaker, because he is also showing a lot of ambiguity. He's questioning himself a lot of the time.
Yes.
Should I really be filming this? Is this morally ethical?
Should I intervene or should I keep a distance?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's doing that for all of his films, and so I strongly suggest getting this. You can read it for The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On sections alone, and you'll get so much. Yeah. And there is actually a second section. It's divided into two parts. So the first part is going into each of the documentary films that he did. And then the second part of the book is what's known as The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On production notes. And these are about 200 pages worth of production notes by Hara, going into all the details and like you go into the background of the scenes, etc. Essential reading if you're interested in that film from Hara's perspective himself. And he has a lot. He doesn't hold back.
Yeah, and the fact that it was almost a sequel.
Oh yes. Yeah. I don't. That's one of the things about the subject matter. Is that there's a sort of who is doing the manipulating?
Yes.
Is it the right? So that's a different. Yeah, that's a related topic. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I do need to pick up his other films, but they're quite expensive and expensive on DVD. But hopefully, I'll pick them up one day.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, they'll come out in second run.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or Criterion.
Yeah. I hope so. So. His works are very challenging. They're not for everyone. That's for sure. But they are I think an essential part of sort of contemporary Japanese cinema. And Emperor's Naked Army Marches On that great release from Second Run. Anyone who's interested in Japanese cinema, a serious look at Japanese cinema, all sides of it, the good and maybe the challenging as well, should watch that film. I'm so happy for you mentioning it.
I'll also just add, you also recommended Funeral Parade of Roses, which BFI is releasing on Blu-ray as well. So
I heard about that.
That's an interesting film as well.
Yeah.
I should have mentioned that when we were talking about BFI. Well, so that's BFI, correct?
Yeah. I think it's tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Quite soon.
I'm pretty sure it's tomorrow. It's like
that is perhaps if anyone ever asks me what is the film I should watch if I want to understand Japanese cinema, almost always I'll say Funeral Parade of Roses.
That's an interesting film as well.
I mean it's an amazing experience, and it has so many things. It's the references alone I have so much trouble keeping up with, but everything is all there. And if you want to, it's such an important work. That and Oshima's, any work by Oshima. But yeah, Funeral Parade of Roses. That's great. It's going to be released tomorrow. Is that what you said?
I'm pretty sure it's tomorrow.
Yeah, I've got it in pre-order, so it should be.
Goodness, that is fantastic news.
Well, thanks for that recommendation as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot out tomorrow. Actually, tomorrow's tons of stuff coming out. Don't know why.
What else is coming out tomorrow?
I don't know. It just seems there's a lot coming out. It's like some
specialists out tomorrow on Eureka.
Yeah, it seems to be some weeks they just have a lot coming out. It's like you can't even remember all of them because there's so much. And other weeks there's not. So
yeah, the next few weeks there's quite a lot.
Yep.
I think 88 Films are releasing Mystery Men with Ben Stiller.
I heard about
William
I
Macy.
love that movie.
Yeah.
I saw that in the movie theater. Yeah.
So did I. I saw it in the cinema as well.
That's coming out in Blu-ray.
Mystery Men? Did you say
Yeah.
Mystery Men? What? Oh, that's great. Yeah. I love that film. I really love that. I never understood why it didn't get more love when it was first released. I thought it was such a clever movie.
Yeah, it just people aren't interested. I mean, I did a video on it and nobody watched it. It was like my lowest video ever by a mile. It was like, oh my god, no one's interested.
Life's about timing.
Yes.